25. Priya. The man wearing the specialized shoulder pads, the same bastard who'd dragged Gemini through the blasted portal and away from our foundation, turned from the bearded one and looked skyward. Then he leveled his gaze as he looked out over the crowd. What's he doing? Out of a sense of self-preservation, I dipped a few inches, then decided it could send the wrong message to the citizen with whom I'd bantered. Although their leader never spoke a word, all the soldiers hustled down the stairs that wrapped around the front of the massive temple, then strode left. They formed ranks at the bottom. A man in silver plate with red cloth covering his unarmored portions raised a hand and twirled it in a circle. I slipped through the crowd, ignoring the calls of the man behind me, then finally broke out at the bottom of the temple stairs. The men formed new ranks as they jogged up a side road. There was no shortage of foul expressions turned in my direction when I dared set my feet on the bottom stair to avoid the crowd before speeding by. A moment later, it occurred the reason for the silent and sudden departures that left the bearded priest atop the stairs was some kind of chat communication. Probably a clan chat dedicated to defense of the city, or the capture of my betrothed. Judging from their haste, I assumed the latter, and that just wouldn't do. A new pane popped up in the periphery of my interface, then slid to the center. You are being offered a quest. Run them down. Catch up with the soldiers outside Brusaria and dispatch them with haste. Objective: disable at least 5 soldiers. Rewards: a weapon appropriate for your class and current level. 100 gold. I hustled around the southern edge of the temple stairs, then scurried through the portions of the crowd that wrapped them at the bottom. The soldiers disappeared around a curve, so I ran over to the left side of the road where a line of shops would obstruct their view of my approach if any bothered to turn and look back. But when I approached the curve, I grew lightheaded and had to throw out my arms to keep my balance. Oh, please, not now. The world tilted right. I tilted left. My shoulder banged into a wall. I locked my knees and stood fast. The light faded, but only for a moment before it bloomed again. Gone was the rain. The wind died. The crackle of fire reached my ears as my surroundings dimmed again. I lounged behind a wide oak desk with one leg crossed over the other. 2 chairs faced it on the other side, empty. A painting on the wall to the right of the fire depicted a great bear reared on its hind legs, preparing to swipe both arms at a tiger crouching low. Its mouth open and teeth bared as if in a roar. A pair of long fangs curved down from the top side of its sneer. I didn't need to turn to confirm there was a window behind me. A bookshelf next to it stacked with tomes. I knew because this was my room. The office of the Magister of the University of Warrington. A warmth crept over my shoulders. My gaze darted to the left corner of the door. The lone corner of my office shaded from the light of the fire. Sneaky bastard. You must stop appearing in my office. If they were to find you. There's little chance of that. I have abilities. Do not interrupt me. I might have to tolerate your slithery ways, and I might have to interact with you when our Lord wishes it. But when you traverse my space, you will show a modicum of deference. The bastard laughed sarcastically. Is that supposed to compel me? You forget who is in charge here. Who has long lingered in this deceptive palace masked as a bastion of academia. The queen of this mirage is but a spectre herself. Nary a second passed in time when suddenly the shadow was gone and hot breath caused ripples of repulsion to course down my neck and shoulders. He whispered low. And if you think Cain would punish me for sucking your life force and joining you into the ranks of my acolytes, you are sadly mistaken. Why, he would probably reward me for my initiative. Haven't you realized that bitch matron isn't coming to your aid? She knows how you bastardize her precious light. You are alone here, Delphine. And considering you won't even recruit to feed Cain's life force, you tread a narrow chasm when you cast your threats toward me. I forced away the shivers to steady my voice. I serve many functions for your lord. No one else could. I am the magister of this university, facade or not. The professors here are kept in check. Not to mention charmed so you can feed on their mana while they sleep so your own lifeless reserves are refilled. Tell me, how will you scry out more innocence without me? If you were gone, I would cast such a haze over this place, they would slumber through their days in fear of a danger they can't even detect. They would live under the impression of an evil they can't define. It would give me joy, but I still hold out hope that you might someday be really useful to me, Delphine. The edges of his fangs curved dimples into my neck. He bit down, but not hard enough to break the skin, then drew away. The next time we speak, I hope you will have changed your mind. He sauntered to the door, and if I hadn't been so devoid of the light for so long, I might have prayed to the goddess that no one would be in the hallway to spy him. His words annihilated the thought. Oh, and while I'm here, Pronto grows suspicious. Put him back on his leash, or I will. The door closed behind him with a subtle click. Tension crept out of my jaw when I unclenched my back teeth. I balled my fists, then slammed them down on the desk. My eyes flooded open. The daylight reasserted its will. I leaned, doubled over against the outer wall of a shop as a heavy rain roared around me. Lightning flashed. An armored man wearing a helmet with its faceplate pushed back grasped my arm.
You okay, miss?
You have recovered a memory. You have regained a level. Congratulations. You have reached level 44. +2 intellect. +2 constitution. You have 10 attribute points to spend. You have remembered a spell. Choke 3. Use shadow energy to constrict the airway of your enemy, as your shadow energy raises them from the ground. New effect. Channel additional mana into the spell to throw the enemy. Note: thrown enemies will remain airborne until you release the choke effect. Type: channeled shadow spell. Effect: choke. Cost: 40 mana per second channeled. Damage: 42 damage per second, DOT. A distant voice echoed.
Ma'am, are you unwell?
What? Oh yes, I dusted off my clothes unnecessarily. How kind. Thank you. I locked my knees, rolled onto the balls of my feet, then relaxed onto my heels. Thank you, I repeated.
All right then.
He released my arm, then sped off. As I watched him go, the curve he rounded brought it all back. The soldiers marching from the temple in 2 ranks, then disappearing around that same curve. Ghostly visions, echoes of the dream danced across my mind's eye. Then I recalled I was on a quest to thin the herd pursuing my man and his goblin companion. I could fret and worry about the past, but that would serve no one. Cain was a ghost come to haunt me. Jakan was a dark spirit run through by a wooden stake returned to poison my soul. After the guard rounded the curve, I sped off after him. Thanks to the violent downpour, the street was otherwise empty, so I dipped into doorways when I thought he might look back, but his focus was forward. He'd fallen behind. A quick check of his level revealed that I could easily disable him and complete 1/5 of the objective for my quest. But sometimes patience served. He would lead me to his people. When I turned to follow him down a side street, I followed no street at all. Instead, I stood facing a massive gate constructed of iron slats in a crisscrossing pattern that cut the natural scene beyond into squares. The pouring rain cast a sheet of gray over rolling green hills. A line of carts wrapped around to the left as their owners cowered against the downpour. 2 guards faced the onslaught of people. One turned to watch the man who'd helped steady me as he sped through the gate, then toward the hills. When a crack of thunder drew his eyes skyward, I slipped against the far wall, hopefully unnoticed, then sped out into the rainy day.
Before we get to the next chapter, I thought I'd annoy you some more. It cost me an assload of money to produce these books, so I'd appreciate your support. You can sign up on my Patreon if you're flush, but if you aren't, just sitting through the minimum ads I'm allowing during this production is of great help. If you're a YouTube Premium subscriber, you're already helping. Now, enjoy Chapter 26.
26. I lay in the grass to keep out of the soldiers' sight lines, my soaked black attire masking my presence. They stood in a circle with their chins tilted down as if in prayer, but the whites of their eyes were visible, so I assumed something on the ground held their interest. I sent Gemini another party invite while I waited. Out of range, my irritation swelled. When the soldiers mounted again, another inner thought came, a foreign thought. It passed through my mind with a blossoming desire to expend my darkest energies. Take them down. Resolve this quest while you can. But why was I concerned with a quest when the soldiers fled the temple and hurried through the gate? Didn't that indicate Gemini must be somewhere nearby? Why the sudden draw to XP? The hunger to advance? It was almost like an inner soul prompted me forward, which left me wondering who was in charge. Had my brain split in two? Was I Delphine and Priya as I'd suspected before? Or had Laivation warped my mind? Perhaps the Warsager's corrupt minions who tinkered with my memories started this strange landslide in my mind. But regaining my past was one thing. Recovering levels seemed the domain of the goddess. Or Hokram, my own inner voice relayed. I longed to go to my mother and ask the matron what she knew about the long-term effects of the mind-erasing potion. Despite my betrayal of our mission at Warrington University, I couldn't bring myself to believe Pronto would use the concoction if he knew about the long-term effects. High-level alchemist he'd been, he would have known. The mystery burned. No matter the hundreds, maybe thousands of magic users subjected to laivation, even the elven archives Giles shared with me yielded little useful information. Probably because the affected ended up feed for Kame's life force and didn't survive to tell their tales. It wasn't like victims remained for the elves to study. Another errant thought brought me around. Do your business, then you can find your man when it's done. When the horses trotted off, I pushed up to my feet, then hunched to approach what the soldiers had circled to analyze. I shivered violently in the cold rain, and my limbs quaked with every step. But when I reached the sources of their inspection, I grinned. Never before had the sight of dead bodies encouraged me so, and that was saying a lot. 3 figures, one ripped into so many shreds I couldn't be sure of its gender. The other 2 were men. I set my hands on my hips, then scanned them a second time. The one whose body lay twisted with his face mauled off drew a query. Even if Gemini left his swords at the Foundation, he's still a level 24. How did he defeat such a high-level knight? Only one of his pets could cause those kind of wounds. Sheena. The sheer brutality of that animal warmed my heart. I'd have easily called Click my favorite of Gemini's pet arsenal if the way she fed like a vampire to heal herself hadn't reminded me of Jakan. The higher-level man would have to be weakened for Sheena to leave him in that state. It'd be one thing if she'd fed on him after the fact. Gashes from her long claws differed from the missing chunks I'd have spied if she'd used her teeth. If Gemini was still level 24, and Charney was still 19, I'd received no messages to the contrary. They'd either been very lucky with their critical hit ratio, or someone traveled with them. As the former head of an academic institution where I'd studied so many professions, I knew I lacked the data for conjecture. So I stood straight as the pursuers disappeared over the hill, then prepared to jog after them. But a voice changed my plans. That's her. A ping of familiarity. A swelling of frustration. I didn't need to turn to know the voice of the man who'd stood beside me in the crowd at the temple. Perhaps my lack of attention and sudden departure lent offense. Maybe his desires left him wanting and he'd decided to teach me some manners. But the 4 men standing around him wouldn't care why he'd led them to me. A single horse kept its distance. A man in a silvery plate with a close-cut beard nodded. Yup, that's her. Ingrate, I muttered beneath my breath. Too bad the goddess wouldn't credit his death to my quest, which meant wiping the lot of them would leave me one short. Nothing was ever so simple. So be it. Hello. Have I done something to offend? The bearded man shook his head, then took a step forward. Nice try, Missy, but we didn't fall off the ox cart yesterday. Oh, did you fall off today? I'm sorry. Perhaps I should take my leave so you can recover from your apparent head injury. They traded confused glances. I rolled my eyes, unwilling to resist my urges for social convention. I'm not sure what this man told you. I looked him up and down with my features twisted in disgust at calling him a man at all. But I assure you, I'm not worth your time.
We know who you are, Priya Sky. I've already analyzed you. You're Fowler's concubine.
Concubine? I delivered a derisive squint. Did you just call me a...
I could have called you a whore. Count yourself lucky.
He cocked his head toward a pair of his men.
She'll be meeting the king.
When the first foot shifted in my direction, I threw my hands out and formed claws. But when I reached for the energy to fill my cast with mana, only the faintest glow streamed down my arms. Instead of the fluid motion I'd grown accustomed to, my casting bar hitched, withdrew, hitched again. I squeezed my eyes shut, then focused. Then a voice spoke inside my head.
Not delay. Tap into the source.
My eyes shot open. The strange timbre sent a wave of apprehension rippling through my being. My fingers and toes tingled with numbness. In contradiction to all the errant thoughts penetrating my mind in recent days, this voice came with such clarity. It creaked and crumbled as if the human woman's throat had passed the spoken word for hundreds of years.
Tap into the source. Seek the warmth of the shadow and let it flow into your casting, for you are fireborn.
Fireborn? I spoke the query aloud. Motion. The men who'd paused when I raised my hands to cast stood frozen, apprehensive. But the sound of my voice must have prompted them back into action. The first charged.
Reach down, Delphine. Seek the warmth of the shadow's purest resource.
Without thought, I sought the coolness of the ley lines Jara taught me to employ so long ago.
Deeper. Reach for the lava lines.
Then I found myself bypassing the ley. All my instincts called for me to cast, to use the ley's energy to push magic through my arms and let it burst forward from my crooked fingers. But my mind sensed the involuntary deviation. Like somewhere inside I grasped deeper into the depths underfoot. Although it happened in the blink of an eye, the sensations came with such clarity, I knew I would never erase them from my mind. The heat started in my toes, then coursed to my ankles before shooting up to my knees. A fiery eruption of energy shot to my pelvis, then tore through my chest as my body was cast in an orange glow so bright, it radiated into an aura around my flesh and clothing. The black sheen of my silken garments reflected the effect, so I seemed alight as my casting bar filled. Then torrents of hot fire exploded from my fingertips. You have tapped into the source. Casting time reduced. Magic damage increased. Mana recovery increased. You cast Flame Torrent. The first man burst into flames, then turned and sped away.
Withdraw. Let your cast dissipate so the source does not overcome you.
Only a few steps gone, he had the wherewithal to drop into the wet grass, then roll. Maybe the rain couldn't help him against unnatural fire created by magic, but I'd already turned my focus on the other, who'd paused to absorb the real-life consequences of calling the daughter of the matron of the wood a whore, even if he hadn't exactly called me that. Empowered by the fiery sensation burning through my body, an involuntary grin spread my cheeks so wide I got the sense they might split. I threw out a single claw the second time, and shadow energy tingled around my fingers as I prepared an advanced version of a spell I hadn't recalled until recently. The second encroacher grasped for his throat, then raced off the ground. His feet kicked like he wanted to pedal backward and away. Enthused by the warmth of the lava, I chuckled as he suffered. You cast Choke 3, Unknown Soldier, minus 137 HP. Additional effect, Suffocate, minus 41 HP. Suffocate, minus 39 HP. Suffocate.
There now, dear,
I grumbled in a crackling voice foreign to my ears.
It will be over soon.
Their leader took 2 steps back, drew his sword, then pointed for the last man to attack.
What are you waiting for? Get her.
The soldier hesitated, a wise response in my estimation, but I couldn't credit him when I had a quest to complete. While I choked the soldier with one hand, I raised the other, showing my flat palm to the grunt. Only with the deepest concentration did I draw a second wave of shadow energy toward my offhand. My mana bar divided in 2. The resource split between the halves. Although the first bar drained from the choke spell, the second stuttered. A quick glance at the Choke 3 spell description reminded me of a new feature. New effect. Channel additional mana into this spell to throw the enemy. Note: thrown enemies will remain airborne until you release the choke effect. The elderly voice returned.
You must cease the casting. Release the fire lest it consume.
I dropped the second hand. The mana bars reunited. With focus, I sensed energy building in my arm. I swung it violently to one side and the man sailed through the air. When I flipped my hand over, the spell terminated and he crashed headfirst to the wet surface. Unknown soldier, minus 144 HP. Thrown. You have crossed your magic resistance threshold. Minus 35 HP. The source. Minus 35 HP. The source. Undeterred by the pittance of HP losses, I persisted. The energy crept up my other arm in the form of an orange glow. As if waking from his stupor, the man decided standing there to be annihilated was a less attractive proposition than taking his chances up close with his weapon. Neither choice would have served him, but at least he'd decided to die fighting. I had to respect that. Who are you? I recognized that voice. It was my own. Minus 45 HP, the source. Minus 45 HP, the source. The glow crept to my wrist, then burst across my palm and into my fingers. The low power consumed me. Its orgasmic potential demanded my full release. Flame exploded from my clawed digits. The man screamed, dropped his weapon, turned tail, then dove to the ground. Then he exploded. Minus 55 HP, the source. Minus 57 HP, the source. 55% HP remaining.
Okay, there need be no more bloodshed. You may go.
I shook my head. Sweat poured in rivulets into my eyes, but I blinked it away without care. Oh no, dear. It's like you said. You know who I am. I have a reputation to uphold. I marched forward in slow, lumbering strides, raising both hands, ready to devote their violent potentials to this dimwit. To every dimwit across the ages who'd ever wronged me. To Jakar. To Prantu, who'd fed me the potion that ruined my life. To Kame. To the governor of Nal. Release the lava. Let it rescind. The fire tearing through my body dissipated, but slowly as I longed not to let it go. Although he was my senior at 2 levels higher, my enemy disarmed, then dropped to his knees.
I beg of you, miss. I've got 2 girls at home.
My lovely anger dissipated, the orange aura casting me in its light tamped down. Then the stranger's ethereal voice rang out in response to the begging man's claim.
Liar.
I squinted. Oh? What are their names, your daughters?
He
whipped his head around as if searching the air surrounding him for a falsehood to sell. Too slow, liar. I paced in a circle around him. While you are correct and I will be meeting your king, I will do so at a time of my choosing. It's quite possible my face will be the last he ever sees. I raised my wand, pressed it to the back of his neck, and killed him instantly. Despite a difficult life where the goddess rarely cooperated, some consistencies couldn't be ignored. Powerful bursts of magic that were well aimed at the right places and undefended would score mortal wounds almost every time. He really should have done something about his magic resistances. Congratulations, you have reached level 45. +2 intelligence, +2 constitution, bonus roll awarded. A 6-sided die appeared in my interface, then tumbled through the air until it stopped to reveal 4 squiggly lines. +4 wisdom. You have 15 bonus attribute points to spend. Well, a fine roll. Another level. Combined with the ones retrieved through memories, they added up. By the time Gemini spent my attribute points, I'd be well on my way to enjoying the power I'd enjoyed so many years ago. I turned to find the man who'd led the guards to me stomping away, his fine shoes sloshing in puddles of water hidden by the shin-high grass. Excuse me, I called over the rain. He stopped. His shoulder quaked violently a few times, then he turned.
I was only doing...
He gasped, clearing his airway.
Only doing my duty.
Spare me your excuses, dolt. I'd have you take a message to the king's guard. I touched a finger to my chin. Well, An additional message, because I'm sure you will regale them with the tale of your bravery during this escapade. I gestured at the corpses with both hands.
You aren't going to kill me?
He blinked against the pelting rain. I shook my head. You're not a combatant, so I'll use you to my own ends. How's that sound?
What message shall I deliver?
Although his tone proved a bit too enthusiastic now that he knew he'd live, I let it go. Tell them they do well to abandon their posts, leave their weapons behind, and join the temple to serve the goddess. Further, inform them the wrath of Solara will soon come to Brusaria, and any who do not bend their knee to the Shenhua will find themselves cast into the eternal black. Did you get all that? He turned, then ran. I suppose he got all of it. In consideration of my blasphemy, I peered skyward to confirm the goddess wouldn't send a painful bolt my way. Then I remembered. I can't die. I cackled as I mounted the leader's horse, but when I flicked the reins to spur the equine into motion, pain exploded in my lower back, then my boot slipped from the stirrup. My hands flailed as I descended toward the ground. My shoulder popped on impact and a vibrant new barrage of pain rippled down my arm and up to my neck. When I rolled onto my back, my shoulder was long forgotten for the radiating shocks of pain. I reached back, grasped a shaft, then yanked it free. I eyed it. An arrow.
Stay where you are, murderer!
A gruff voice came from above.
In the name of His Majesty Constance Luttrell III, I arrest you.
When I tried to rise, my back and shoulder erupted, and when I shifted my weight to accommodate, one boot slipped on the wet ground and I splashed down. I managed to complete this attempt at one of Gemini's curses involving matronhood and sex. A boot landed in the water next to my face, and I got an eyeful of mud. The neckline of my top tightened, then I found myself rising. The man tossed me over one shoulder. I careened through the air, but this time I curved my arms around my head to protect it, and shoulder be damned. After another thud into the waterlogged soil, I threw up one hand to target a chain-wearing attacker with black bangs matted to his forehead. A burst of fiery goodness exploded in his face, but it lacked the power I'd enjoyed when the voice prompted and guided my force up from the lava lines. You cast Fire Flash 2. Hit. Unknown Monk. Minus 72 HP. I garnered the courage to push through my injuries as Giles taught us in combat practice. Although I'd lived hundreds of years prior to meeting the elf, I'd been somewhat sheltered from the pain of melee combat, so I knew the gratitude washing over me belonged to Priya Sky, the woman whom Gemini's elven mentor had intended to train. But it would be Delphine who dealt with this spit stain on elven kind. By the time I reached my feet and struggled through the nightmare of pain from the puncture in my back, the monk was crouched in a demonstration he was no stranger to conflict. A studded club whipped around in a blur of motion, missing my face by mere inches. Unknown Monk uses Sweeping Strike. Miss. I stumbled back a few steps. The monk tossed his silver skull cap away.
Never could stand the weight of that thing.
He tore open the chain vest, then cast it off.
Might have to wear this stuff in the city, but we're in Solara's realm now. Let nature be your undoing.
I reached for the voice inside. Where are you? Why aren't you coming to my aid now? But no answer came. My map popped open without my command, then its pane shrunk and whipped into the top right corner of my field of vision. An indicator blinked north of my own, but before I could focus there, the monk burst forward, throwing out both hands. But he was too far away to strike. I didn't flinch because his body was stubby, his arms muscular but short, and the attack would never reach me. I assumed he would feint, then leap forward, but a burst of golden light ejected from his knuckles at the end of the motion, slamming into my chest, lifting me from the ground, and throwing me backward. I skimmed on the standing water another few feet before coming to a halt. Propping myself onto my elbows, I found him standing bow-legged with his hands pressed palm to palm as he drew deep breaths. Silvery light surrounded his whole body, funneling from head to toe. Unknown Monk uses Blessing of Ka. Plus 44 to resist shadow magic. Minus 5% magic damage received. Good buffs, but I think you're fighting on the wrong side. I winked my eyes in succession, then read my interface pane as I struggled to my feet on the slippery ground. Unknown Monk. Level 50, Monk. Melee power rating, 111. Melee defense rating, 98. Ranged power rating, 17. Ranged defense rating, 72. Magic power rating, 66. Magic defense rating, 84. Magic resistance rating, 62. At 7 levels higher, I would have done well to keep my distance from its melee strikes. Although I didn't encounter many monks in my past life, that I remembered anyway, I had the distinct recollection they were powerful frontline fighters with healing abilities to supplement their magic and melee prowess.
The goddess would have you submit. I offer you clemency if you come willingly, as is my order's law.
I huffed, my shoulders drooping with exhaustion from my earlier expenditure of resources, like the lava lines had tapped the last of my energy. If you're a monk, why are you working for a king who suppresses magic?
I'm not here to answer your questions. I do not know you. I do not judge, but if you do not concede at once, I will pummel you into submission, disable you, then heal you only enough to keep you alive. Choose.
So be it, monk. When I reached for the lava again, my mind stumbled through the ground beneath like Jarin chasing a fallen toy Giles carved him, reaching down only to have it fumble through his grasp. Frustrated, I grasped for the source of the weaving, the coolness of the lay, the magical field that had allowed me to paralyze and levitate Underlord Kane before Gemini finished him off. I thrust my arms out to their sides, my casting bar filled. A cyclone of wind surrounded me, then lifted me up into the air. The monk charged forward, drew his elbows inward as if he'd strike, but that had been a mistake as he played into my hands. You cast Air Bomb. When the monk charged below and his casting bar filled, I waited for the energy to reach his hands, then dropped through the air and slammed into the ground. Water burst from the mud beneath and mixed with the soil to carry debris in a shockwave exploding in all directions. This time, it was the monk's feet that were swept out from under him as he whipped through the air, flipped, then impacted face down. Unknown monk, minus 119 HP, 79% HP remaining. Before he could twitch, I cast Ice Shield. The swirling barrier formed, then spun around me. I followed up by rolling my hands over one shoulder until that wondrous purple light of the shadow was drawn from the ether. You cast Sleep. Unknown monk resists. I growled. Damn it. I let my eyes close as he recovered, reached into the ether beneath for the fiery power of the lava again, but it didn't come. The monk made smacking sounds in the water as he rose. I threw my hands out again, mindful of the mana impact all this back-to-back casting would have, then began to teeter them so one rose while the other lowered. I siphoned the mana from my reserves, then threw both arms in the air. Stones tore from beneath and shot skyward to bounce off the monk's chin, knees, and elbows. He covered his head much like I'd done when airborne moments before, but when I prepared my follow-up, he gave 2 quick punches to the air before him and, a moment later, he stood 1 foot away. Both fists slammed into my chest and I flew backward. Unknown monk uses double punch of Ka. Critical hit. Minus 197 HP. Additional effect. Stun. My arms and legs quivered. My abdominals wouldn't respond when I struggled to sit up. If not for the dark clouds pouring rain from above, his shadow would have fallen over me as he approached, then peered down.
I have you by 7 levels. Submit, and I'm certain the king will show you mercy. After all, if you are truly bound to the Shenhua, as my interface says, you cannot die anyway. What do you have to lose?
Everything. You're going to have to kill me. He shook his head, perhaps in regret, maybe even frustration.
I will not.
He reached down, grasped my garment with both hands, raised me up high, then slammed me onto my back. The wind left me. Stun duration extended by 5 seconds. 7 seconds remaining. I cursed the inner voice who guided my hand. Be it a servant of Holcrum or Solara, I'd have accepted its aid. But the expletives streamed only through my mind as I lacked the wind to carry them to my lips. The monk bent as if he'd reached down again, then his head cocked back. Blood spat from one eye where a fletching jiggled in the socket. A whizzing sound preceded a second arrow bursting into his other eye. The accuracy amazed me, breathless and stunned or not. I forced the back of my head into the grass, then craned my neck to look behind me. The sight I saw, although upside down, brought waves of gratitude and relief. Amelia Horn uses exploding shot 2. Critical hit. Unknown monk. Minus 112 HP. Amelia Horn uses drilling shot 3. Critical hit. Mortal wound. Unknown monk. Minus 129 HP. Minus 42 HP. Bleed. Minus 42 HP. Bleed. Minus 42 HP. Bleed. Amelia stepped into view wielding a beautiful dagger from a pair Giles had gifted her prior to our raid on Underlord Kame's stronghold. Submit, monk. I would take no pleasure in extinguishing a creature of the light. The monk shook his head.
I cannot, for today I execute the goddess's will. If I die doing it, then my order shall be blessed.
Amelia gave a curt nod, almost as if she'd expected the response. May she take you to her bosom, holy warrior, for you fought well. She drew back her dagger, then stabbed the blind monk in the forehead. Then she drew me to my feet. My palms whisked water from my garments. Where in the world did you come from? The drainage system. I've been running around there killing giant rats and spiders in search of you two since yesterday. She extended the dagger so the rain cleansed blood and brain matter from the flat of its blade. I'm surprised you're not with Gemini by now. I fumed.